Hello, and welcome to episode 30 of the Bell Falls Search Focus on Talent podcast. I'm your host, Ron Lanier. Each week, we share the career stories of tech experts and marketing mavens, operational gurus, and sales leaders to illustrate how they have navigated the nonlinear career path. Today's guest began his career in end user support and network engineering before progressing into project management and consulting. He's developed a niche expertise in financial services and has advised numerous banks on marketing strategy and new client acquisition. Over the last 14 years, he's progressed into an executive operations role with one of the most forward-looking consulting firms in the United States. I'm very excited to introduce my good friend, Jansen Meyers, partner at Centric Consulting. Jansen, thanks a lot for being here.
Ron, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. I am also a podcaster, so I'm really excited to see how someone else does this and how you navigate your podcast because I'm looking forward to learning something today. Really excited about that too.
Well,
I have a podcast called On and Two, which is a golf podcast. I started it with a member that I play golf with frequently. We're doing it as a passion project, which is something we'll talk about today. I think that's really important for most, if not all people to have. So I do it for enjoyment and an outlet, and passion has nothing to do with income or anything else. It's all about enjoying the game and sharing ideas with other people.
as you and I talked, one of the common themes that continues to unfold for me in these conversations is the concept of the nonlinear career path. And in your case, as I look at your background, and you and I have known each other for a long time, I'm going to summarize your career in three big chunks. There's
Okay.
where you started out of school. Let's just call it an IT support network engineering. There was the transition along the path into financial services, which I think obviously took up a big chunk of your career. And that's where you and I met back in the
Right.
Bravante. Then there was the progression into, I'll call it executive operations. You had a pretty significant, or still have a pretty significant, I'll say, human capital piece of your role too. So I think a lot of our conversation is very relevant. But can you walk through those three big segments of your career and talk about how those unfolded, whether they were intentional decisions, whether they were pure chance, what impacted those moves in career?
Absolutely. And it's an interesting journey. I know everybody's is different. I came out of school with the structure of my career was like checking off a project plan, right? I literally had a list and a schedule. What job am I going to have at 25? What job am I going to have at 30? How much money am I going to make at 35? When am I going to be CEO? And wow, you talk about getting smacked in the face. Because I thought it was very much of you do A and then you do B and then you do C. And that's just not how it worked out. But it worked out phenomenally well.
Yeah.
I came out of school, and one of the underlying themes you talk about, it's very much about a nonlinear path, but it's also about understanding how and why to make decisions at different points in your life. So one of the stories I tell as we talk to recruits, or if I talk to kids of friends when they're coming out of schools, is understanding why you're making a decision and a little bit about not only what you want, but what you don't want. And you'll hear me say that a few times today. When I came out of school, the majority of my education was in application development. This will tell you how far this goes back. I had a lot of COBOL and CICS classes. I had one networking class, one. My first offer out of college was to do COBOL development. I knew I didn't want to do that. I had a good friend that worked for a firm that they did desktop support and project management and infrastructure work. I said, I want to work with you. So I took 25% less money to go do something I knew that I would like doing. I knew I would work harder. I knew it would help me develop my career. And that started me down the path of, as you described, the first third of my career, which started in desktop support. It then grew into running projects for desktop support, which then grew into managing teams that did desktop and infrastructure support. And I learned a lot. And I knew that I was at least in the right arena because I knew that I was doing something not only that I enjoyed, but that I wanted to be good at. I made that initial decision based on not only what I wanted, but what I knew I didn't want. I started to find that was a theme in my career. The second third of my career was made for a different decision. Post 9/11, the market changed. I was laid off. I didn't have a job. I went to a bank in Cleveland, now called First Community Bank, but it was Ohio Savings Bank at the time. I needed a job. I had a close friend, ironically, the same one who helped me get into the position out of college. I went to work with the same individual. He had relocated to the Cleveland area. He was working for a bank and he called and said, I know you've been looking for a job. I know it's been almost 9 months. I was young. I had a young child. I'd only been married a couple of years. We didn't really want to move, but he said, you need to find a job. I have the job that you would be really good at. It's different than what you've done, but I think you'd be really good at it. I'd like you to come meet with our CIO and interview. And that's going to be one of the things we talk about later is you have to be willing to take a chance. And I did. So I went and I interviewed for the job, which actually was running a portion of their IT procurement organization. I was in charge of managing the process for bringing in hardware and software into the organization. That was something I had never done. Now I knew I could do it because I had been on the vendor side, right? I started in the VAR, we call it VAR, value added reseller channel. I understood or had set in the seat of the people we were buying from. It gave me a good perspective to help build out the process to make the acquisitions. I hadn't done it, but I knew I was capable of doing it. But that job came out of necessity. It didn't
Mm.
come out of a desire to go into financial services or procurement. It came out of necessity in that I needed a job and I wanted to stay in the technology field. While I was at Ohio Savings, I was in that role about 2 years, 18 months to 2 years. A project management role opened up inside the mortgage division at the same organization. Again, didn't have any knowledge about mortgage. I was like, I've done a lot of project management. I want to try something else, but I do want to stay with this organization. I took that role, but I took it because it was building a skill in a different area. I was learning all kinds of things about the mortgage industry, all of these different processes that they have, but it's still inside of financial services. Now, if I look back to when I came out of college, I knew I wanted to do project management, but I never said I want to understand loss mitigation and loan servicing and mortgage acquisition. That just wasn't on my list, but it was an opportunity to learn something new. This is where when you talk about nonlinear path, I was there in that role about another 2 years. I was at the bank altogether 4 years, decided I wanted to go back into consulting. I took a job as a project manager and I only had that maybe 8 months when this individual named Ron Lanive calls me out of the blue and says, hey, I'd like to interview you. And I thought, for what? Like, who are you and where are you coming from? This goes to the taking a chance. I said, I just took this job. I don't think you're probably really going to want to hire me away. You said, why don't you let me figure that out? Right. This firm I'd never heard of called Brulant says, we want you to come work in our financial services division. I looked around and thought, whoa, gosh, I didn't even plan to get into financial services to begin with. And now someone wants me to come work for their organization because I understand financial services. And interestingly enough, one of the things I focused on was mortgage acquisition and processes as well as client acquisition inside of financial services. I had no idea that's where I would end up. But to your point about just following the path helped me accumulate things that I didn't even know I was going to need,
Yep.
but helped me end up in a good spot.
Yep. Yep. No, that's a fantastic story. Who was your first financial services client at Brulant?
First Citizens Bank out of
Oh,
Raleigh, North Carolina. I still talk to some of them today. I don't talk to them quite as often as I used to, but every 6 months, 6 to 12, 18 months, I'll reach out to some of them just to ask how they're doing. I still keep in touch with them. I look back, that was 18 years ago. So the connections that you make and the people that you interact with, it was great.
it's funny. One of the things you mentioned earlier, man, there's a lot of cool connections in the progression that you made there. But one of the key things was there was an individual who was looking out for you. It's always about who you know, not what you know. A lot of times, not to steal your thunder, but I know in the next move you made, there's a lot of who you knows in that as well. So can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So my career progression became building momentum of individuals and knowledge collectively that I was acquiring through my career. That is probably the best way I could say it. I was at Brulant, I think 3 years. We went through some organizational change. I knew I still wanted to stay in consulting. I felt like I had probably reached the point that I needed to move organizations to be able to level up back to, I knew what I wanted. and I knew what I didn't want. I said, I think I'm going to test the market. I called an individual who had previously worked at Brulot. His name's Mark Kuczynski. And I just said, hey, Mark, I'm interested in changing jobs. Can you point me in the right direction? He said, well, as a matter of fact, this company that I work for called Centric Consulting is hiring out of the Cleveland office. And Mark was my counselor when I was at Brulot. And he said, Matt Durker is actually there in the Cleveland office. Well, Matt set 2 chairs from me in the
Mhm.
office at Brulot. Here I am reaching out to these individuals that I had worked with at Brulot. I called Matt and said, Matt, I understand you're looking for a senior manager, project manager in the Cleveland office. Can you tell me a little bit about the role? Here's where it gets really interesting about what that piece sounds like that was the key, but it really wasn't. I reach out to Mark. Mark connects me with Matt. I sit down with Matt and his partner opening that office, Joe Smuch. And we start talking about things I've done and type of work I've done. And they said, we have a project we're interested in putting you on. And it's at a company at the time was called LPS Field Services. And I think it's now called Black Knight. It had changed. And I said, oh, really? Are you working with Sheriff Fitzgibbon? You should have seen how big their eyes got. They sat back and they went, yeah. Then you must know Curtis Larson. And I rattled off like 8 people. All of these people were people I had worked with in the mortgage division at Ohio Savings Bank 4 years earlier, because LPS focuses on the loss mitigation piece thing that I
Wow.
think I would need. That's what they focus on, property preservation and loss mitigation. And they just sat there and looked at me like, how could you know that? And I said, I worked with all of them. And they said, do you know Pat Gleasing? And I said, as a matter of fact, he was the executive, the CEO of the mortgage division at Ohio Savings. And I worked directly with him as my sponsor for every project. And they jokingly looked at me and said, you're hired. Like,
I never knew all this. That's fascinating.
all because of individuals that I worked with literally over a 8-year period from Ohio Savings through Brulant to here.
And you got to Ohio Savings because you were out of work and you needed to, and somebody threw you a bone to help you out.
And an individual that I went to college with, which, by the way, he's now on my IT team here at Centric. I've returned the favor, right? And I don't want to say it that way. He said, I want to do something different. And I said, I have the perfect role for you.
Yeah.
But yes, somebody that I went to school with helped me get the first job. And then when I say helped me get the job, introduced me to the hiring manager. And in the same situation, when I needed a job,
Yep.
introduced me to the hiring manager.
Yep.
And that second job, not knowing I would end up in mortgage and meet those people, became the way that I was able to get the next job when I wanted to make a change. And that's how I ended up at Centric. And I've been here. It's March 20 and it's April 1st. As of March 19th, I was here 14 years. This is the longest I've ever been anywhere. And
Right.
that came through my financial services expertise and the individuals that I met along the way. And that's how I ended up at Centric.
But this was all in your plan that you created back in college, right? Before you started?
I would love to say yes, but it was not. And what I learned as I navigated my career, and I've said this a couple of times, is making my decisions became less about checking boxes and more about knowing what is important to me and why am I making the decision. And it became time periods in life. Taking the job that I had to have was about being newly married and having a child who was literally 6 months old. And I needed a job and I wanted to work someplace I was comfortable with, but I needed a job. Coming to Centric was about knowing I want to elevate my career. It wasn't about not liking where I loved. I loved Brulon. I loved being there, but I wanted to do something different. I knew what I wanted, right? And I knew I did not want to be in that role for another 3 or 4 years. So I came to Centric. I will say that my first 2 years at Centric was the end of that second third of my career.
Yep.
I got into that spot because of things that had added up over a 12-year period, not because of any one decision. I think a lot of times people feel like you get this phone call from a recruiter and you say yes, and then you get hired to be the CEO. And yes, we all recognize we learn things through our career, but the building process isn't just what you're learning. It's who you're interacting with. It's what you're gleaning. It's how you're navigating, and it's your own ability to learn to make those decisions. It's really critically important. I think that's what we don't teach high school and college students soon enough is how to learn to make that decision for themselves and understand what they want. That's really important in your career. Super critical.
Yep. I couldn't said it any better than that. So can we talk about that last third? Now that you've been at Centric for
Absolutely.
a while, my understanding is your role is, I'll say, more internally focused than client focused. Is that right? Or is it some of both?
It started client focused when I came to Centric. As I started working on a client project, but my aspirations was to be a partner in the organization. In 2014, I achieved that. I used to be a member of the Cleveland leadership team, and that we call them business units because we don't have physical offices. We're entirely virtual, and we were entirely virtual pre-COVID. We have been for 25 years, right? As I worked through that part of my career, I achieved what I would call my initial aspirations. I made it to partner. I had an opportunity to lead and develop individuals. I was part of growing the business. I was part of owning a small piece of the business. That felt like I had achieved, at least in that area, what I wanted to achieve. But my life began to change again. If you go back to the beginning of the story, when I said I had to take a job because I had a young daughter, now that daughter is now graduating high school and going to college, and my life is very different. My parents are aging into their 70s, and my dad still farms and they need help. I went to the leadership, and here I thought I wanted something. I thought I wanted to be the leader of that office. We called it a business unit lead. That was the whole reason I came to Centric, is I wanted to achieve that. When they offered it to me, I said no, because I knew what was more important is I need to move home to be close to my family. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So here I am. I've worked for something. I made partner, but I've worked to become the business unit leader and realized, but that's not the thing that's probably most important. It might be the thing I want, but it's not the thing that's most important. In that moment, you feel like you're giving something up. I said, I need to move home. I was in Cleveland. I need to move back to the Dayton area. I need to be close enough to my family I can help. Right. I need to be in an area where I can be supportive. They said, no problem. We'll figure out how we handle that. And I took the opportunity to create a position, which someone else now has. But I said, hey, I think we have a need in our organization for this leadership role. And we talked through it for a couple months. And they said, absolutely. Like, that is a great idea. And I moved into that role, but I never actually got to do it because what happened is now I'm available to them. And there were multiple large projects and change initiatives. And they just kept saying, well, before you do that, can you do this? And oh, before you do that, can you do this? One thing became three, which became five. And then those five became, we need some additional leadership in our operational functions. Can you take on these three departments that we have? I just kept saying, yes, right? Absolutely, I can. That grew into having a leadership role inside of our internal operations. We have since reorganized, right? Because we've gotten bigger. I'm now leading our IT function and our transformation office. When I created that other role, these things were never even on my radar, never
Yeah.
even considered them. The
Yep.
roles didn't even exist. Someone else is actually in the role I created, but that doesn't matter. Evolution that started with, I knew what was important to me and why I needed to make the decision, gave me the clarity to take the risk and accept new challenges, knowing I was still in the right spot. Those roles have grown and developed into a broader leadership opportunity, but it was still rooted in knowing what I wanted and knowing what was important to me.
Kudos to Centric, where, as I mentioned earlier in my introduction, I
Absolutely.
call them one of the more forward-thinking consulting firms in the U.S. for a couple of reasons. One, because of everything you just mentioned around the ability to maybe craft your own role that has a lot of value add to the business, but also to do it on kind of terms that work for both of you, completely remote. Larry English wrote his book years ago about.
Office optional. Yeah, absolutely. He wrote that book and released it 30 days before the lockdown and the pandemic, not knowing the pandemic was coming. We joke that it's a guide on how to run an office optional or remote organization, but we've always been remote. We've always been focused on the client, no physical office space outside of IT as an office space where we keep laptops and configure machines, no physical brick and mortar office space to say. And we were progressive in that way. We were early adopters of what we call self-managed PTO. There is no number. There isn't 2 weeks and then you get to 3 and then you get to 5. We said, you're all professionals, right? Take the time when you need it. Make sure you're managing your work, right? And treat it like a business.
And we're talking about a firm that started in the late 90s, early 2000s, right? I mean, it's
99 to 2000 was the start. Self-managed PTO came about in 2000, like 11 or 12, maybe 13 at the latest. It wasn't in the last 2 years. That was early on.
there was even the virtual thing. I remember running into a lot of you guys at coffee shops and different places around town and saying, what are you doing? You're like, oh, I'm working. What do you mean you're working? This is how you work? You get to do this? It's fantastic. Very cool.
They have been great in not only can you craft a path in a world that has non-linear paths, but we focus on retaining good talent. We are not about this person only does this role. No, this person can do things really well. What can we put them in that the organization needs help with? That's where career paths that are nonlinear, as you say, and organizations who know how to leverage those types of individuals, when that comes together, there is great synergy because you can be adaptive and flexible as the market changes, which is what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Roles are changing for people because the market is changing and our company's needs are changing. When you as an individual get locked into, I will only do a certain type of work, or the company gets locked into only certain people can do certain things, it makes it very hard to adapt as the market changes. So that's something I would say to people as they are thinking about their career. Learn to be adaptable because it is a huge asset and you will benefit multiple times from doing that.
That's a great transition. Can we talk about two more kind of cohorts, I call them, the college student or the individual entering the workforce sometime soon? What advice would you give to them? Not only from your experiences, but personally, but you also interview and hire, or have interviewed and hired a lot of these individuals over the years. So what advice do you have for them?
So it's interesting because I said my daughter went to college. She recently graduated, and I would start by giving them the same advice I gave her. One is just don't be in a hurry. Say you're 24, probably younger, but say you're 24 and you might work till at least 54, maybe 64. You have the next 30 or 40 years to develop a career. You don't have to develop your career the first 90 days out of school.
Yeah.
You need to do is figure out where do you want to start? Because as we've been discussing, it's not about where you start, right? You can pick multiple starting points. Not everybody has the same opportunities. I'm not suggesting everybody needs to go walkabout in Australia, right? That's not what I'm saying. Some students may do that. Some students may choose to volunteer. Some students may choose to take passion jobs, things they know they love to see how it develops. Some may say, I want to start in this chosen field and see how it goes. But the primary thing is don't be rigid and in a hurry. You have 30 or 40 years of career time. You will do multiple things and have multiple opportunities to try things. The second piece is try lots of things.
Yeah.
Don't be in a hurry and be willing to try lots of things. When I interview an individual, I personally do not care what their degree is in. What I want to know is what types of things are you good at? What types of things do you like to do? What types of things do you not like to do? Because if there's things you don't like to do and they're a key part of the job, probably won't hire you, but that's okay because we want it to be a mutually good fit. And then why do you want to be here? Why do you think this is the place for you? I mean, once I read their resume once, I personally never pull it out during an interview. It is a discussion. Right?
Yep.
Tell me why you think this is the place for you.
Yep.
Tell me what kind of job you want. Tell me what kind of things you like to do, because my mind then starts to process not what can I do with them today, but what could I do with them 3 years from now? Because I see something that maybe they don't even see, but I'm like, I could start them here, but I see what they have and I can develop them. Not I personally, the company, we can develop them to this because you're always thinking, how do you grow your organization? Not how do I hire and plug somebody in, but how do you grow your organization? If you are an individual who's not afraid to try things and try lots of things, and you're not in a hurry, you're likely more willing to take a job that will develop you more in the long term than what's probably the best answer today.
Your description, do you think that applies only to a consulting or a services type of
No.
role because of the continuous change and different opportunities you get day to day? Or does and should non-consulting organizations think that way too?
I think non-consulting organizations should think that way. I think too many companies are focused on skill, not talent. I don't like using professional sports as an analogy because it's very cliche, but let's think about professional sports. Skills matter, but scouts are looking at talent. What are they capable of? Not what are they doing today? Because nobody that comes into a professional level sport can perform the way they need to that day. But the scout looks at them and says, no, I know they will be able to perform at X. As companies, too many companies are looking at skills and experience. What you did in the past just tells me what you've been able to do. It doesn't tell me what you will be able to do. And I can't even look at a resume and tell how well you did it.
Yep.
I can just tell you were there when it happened. I want to assess in the discussion, what are you capable of doing? And what talent do you have? What comes naturally to you? Are you articulate? Are you adaptive as the conversation changes? Or I throw questions at you that I always ask. I try to ask one of the most bizarre questions I can think of because I want to see how they catch it, receive it, formulate a response, and respond. I don't mean bizarre like it's not relevant, but I ask them something that I expect they would never be asked in an interview. And really good candidates, it doesn't even phase them.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, I hadn't thought about that, but I would say, and they'll answer. And
Yep.
the level of thought and processing and articulation in their answer tells you a lot about the individual. And I think those types of interview scenarios and being able to, I'll say assess, we say score, but assess that objectively tells you something about the individual. I worked with a lady who was part of our people and change practice. And she always said, when I interview someone, I try to think, would I want to be stuck in an airport with this person for 12 hours? Because if I wouldn't, I probably don't want to work with them. And that's probably true
Yep.
because you're
Yep.
going to spend a lot of time with this individual. And that doesn't mean everybody has to be nice, but when you're interviewing as a candidate, the most important thing I would say is be your authentic self.
Mhm.
Because if you're not, you're going to end up in a job you probably don't want, and they're going to end up with an employee that's probably not a good fit.
Yeah. Talked about college students and those entering the workforce soon. What about any new or different advice for, experienced people? How to win the interview, how to get through the application process, anything you've ever seen that's differentiated one candidate from another that stands out in your head?
Couple of things. One is I would carry over the advice from college students and about being your authentic self. People can tell, right? Just just be you. Because if you are, I'm more comfortable if you are your authentic self, regardless of whether you may be somebody I would have dinner with. If you're your authentic self and I'm like, that personality and those attributes would be a good fit for this role, that's what needs to come out. And it's really hard because as I told the stories, it became clear how you need to network and create connections and maintain connections. It doesn't mean you have to reach out to all of these people every day, but you need to be very cognizant of what you're doing and who you're interacting with. Because my grandmother, who's 96, started telling me at the age of 13 and 14, it's not always what you know, it's often who you know. And that's not to say that person can give you a job, but they may introduce you to somebody who introduces you to somebody. That is very important. It also starts to be an indirect way in which you build your personal brand. And we know today your personal brand and the breadth of your network is more important than the skills you have because people are going to assess you. I won't say judge. They're going to assess you at some point based on that. When I say your network, I don't mean how many LinkedIn connections you have. I don't look at that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
I want to know, who do you know that I know? And what would they say if they were sitting here with us? Or they would be willing to say, I don't have a job at my company, but I have a buddy that I hang out with on the weekends. And he's been talking a lot about this need that they have. And I think you'd be a good fit. I'm going to call him and I'm going to tell him, hey, you need to talk to Dave over here. You need to talk to Pam. And see if they might be a good fit, regardless of where people are in their, I'll say, career journey. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
Yep.
Don't be afraid to reach out and continue to build your network and always be your authentic self because that will win out. The other piece is be willing to try something that you didn't maybe think was a fit. But after you have the conversation, you may realize that's a really good fit. You may be in financial services or you may be in the insurance industry, but come to find out working for one of these dental organizations is a great fit because I learned a lot in insurance and I can translate to that type of organization that may have never crossed your mind. So, to those later, I'll say later or farther along in their career, don't ever turn down a phone call. Take the call, conversation, kind of like with us today. I'm learning how you run your podcast, right? Take the conversation and learn something from it. Make a new, even if you're just practicing.
Yeah. Back to your point about taking my call back in the Brillant interview days, right?
Absolutely.
Who knows where the path would have led you today. So,
The other thing is be patient. In
yeah.
this market, they're going to have to be patient.
Yep.
It's going to take time. I think I read the other day, jobs that used to take 3 to 4 months are now taking 9 to 12 months to acquire, something to that effect. Don't remember the exact number. It was more than twice. It was like about 2.5 times the length of time to acquire the job. And just have to be patient.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. That's a great way to end this. We're definitely in an age of massive disruption now. You and I have seen it multiple times in our careers, but this one just feels a little bit more impactful than all the others. Who knows how long it's going to take to shake out. So patience is definitely a key right now, but appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Jansen, I think we're going to have to do a part two eventually, because I think there's a lot of things that
Happy to do it.
chipped away at, but didn't totally unpack. I thank you for your time and really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
All right.